All right.
Okay, we've invited Representative Hutchings to join us for our press availability today because he's working on some significant reform. This is years and years in the making. These are things that Representative Hutchings has been involved in and has led the charge on for a long time. And I think it's a unique circumstance where we've had a couple different policy issues culminate to a package that he's able to advance, and he's got great support in the House and thought it would be important on other critical issues regarding the state. We ought to hear from Representative Hutchings, and maybe if you have questions regarding the justice reform that we're looking at, he can provide context. If you want to give a quick synopsis, maybe.
Oh, you bet, and thanks. For me personally, it's been about 5 years in the works. For the last year, we have been working at this very intently and had a really, really deep team working on it with everybody involved. So corrections, all the folks from Board of Pardons and all that stuff. We've got just a huge amount of time and effort that went into it. And what you're going to see, quite frankly, is a top to bottom, a complete reform of our entire system. And it's really exciting. But the really cool thing about this, I've actually been on the committee that's over corrections and the courts and all of that since I got in the legislature 14 years ago. I've been the chair of it for the last 7, and nobody has ever really wanted to put much time or effort into this topic until the prison move started being talked about. And then suddenly everybody wanted to talk. And it has been very exciting. This last year has been a big deal. We've had everybody at the table, and it has been, the stars really have aligned to do something remarkable in reform. And we've got everybody from the street level officers through the courts, through corrections, all the way down through our folks at adult probation and parole and the Board of Pardons that all agree that it's the perfect time to be able to make a shift. And a big part of that is because when you look at the cost, the impact of a prison move, it seemed like such a huge lift to do all these reforms until you look at the intensity of what a prison rebuild or a prison relocation would be. And now when you look at that in conjunction with the reform, all of a sudden it makes all the sense in the world. And having new facilities and better facilities are going to allow for programming changes. And it's estimated, based off our own data, that over the course of the next 20 years, we can save almost $500 million to the state by implementing these reforms and doing a better job of helping people to be diverted away from incarceration and do a better job with treatment. It's a big, big deal. And we can't do it where we're at. We can't do it with the facilities that we've got. And so the exciting thing is we're at a spot where we could potentially have the right people with the right attitudes and the right facilities to be able to roll this thing out over the course of the next couple of years. And it's just never been possible before. It's very exciting. And
I'm sorry.
Well, the biggest thing that we're going to do, just in a real quick nutshell, is we are going to move serious evaluations of why people commit crimes way up front in the process, pre-sentencing. Now what happens is somebody gets sentenced, they go to prison about 90 to 120 days after they're incarcerated. Somebody sits down and says, "Why did you break the law?" And I said, "Well, I have a mental health disorder and I'm addicted to drugs." Well, at that point, they've already been sentenced. There's not a whole lot we can do about it. We're moving all of that up to the front. So now we can sit down and talk to somebody and say, if you really are a criminal, we're going to lock you up. But if you've got a serious mental health disorder or you have a substance abuse problem, we're going to now have the ability and hopefully the facilities, if things go well over the next few weeks, to be able to have alternatives and put those people on entirely different tracks and treat them differently. And our own data, like I said, shows that if we implement this package that we're talking about over the next 20 years, we anticipate it will save the state about $500 million because of the way we'll have more appropriately managed that population.
Through committee today, are you on track to get this passed before the session starts?
Yeah, this was a good morning. This was a big deal. We had got it through House committee unanimously. We didn't have any opposing votes this morning. Had a tremendous amount of support. In fact, we had so much support that we ran out of time for people to testify in favor of the bill and just had to have everybody stand up in the room and raise a hand and are you here to support it? We had 3 people that had some concerns. It's not perfect. We're not done. There's still some things we got to work out over the course of the next couple of years with the prosecutors and especially the sheriffs, and then how we're going to partner with the jails over the rollout of this. But it's looking good. It's really looking positive.
I want to point out too that Representative Hutchings won't tell you this, but this bill wasn't just kumbaya from the beginning. This wasn't a bill that was universally accepted. Counties had some concerns that this was, when you're reducing some crimes from a felony to a misdemeanor, that you're just shifting the jurisdiction and not really addressing the issue. And there needed to be, to understand what reform was coming forward, and making sure that the state, the way we're going to assess and what we were going to do, was not just foisting the problem onto the counties per se. That took a lot of sharing of information and dialogue, and Representative Hutchings did an incredible job of taking some real skeptics to this reform and bringing them around, because they were mighty in terms of size and amount of concern
and numbers.
And he would disappear even when we were up here, and I would see if he'd finally come back and making great headway. So he's done an incredible job bringing people together on this issue.
I haven't been lonely for a while now.
What are the concerns that you're working through with prosecutors? Does it involve the lighter sentencing, or what exactly is it that is the sticking point, or what you're working through there?
2 primary concerns. One is, if we reduce the penalty, is it still going to have the same preventative effect? Are people going to be afraid of it? But the simple answer to that is, you guys, we've been upping the penalties for years. And the interesting statistic to show you is, even though the crime rate has gone down, the amount of time and the expense that we're putting into incarceration is going up. So how do you have a crime rate dropping and yet total amount of time and total cost of corrections actually increasing? And it's because every time we turn around, we make a stiffer penalty. We love creating felonies out of misdemeanors because that'll stop everybody from being bad. And our own data over the last 20 years has proven it doesn't. Has very, very little effect. In fact, it's having exactly the opposite effect. We're keeping them longer, we're paying more to do it, and we're getting 0 back on the back end as far as people getting out of that mindset. So the other thing that they're concerned about is just supervision. We don't really have a really great structure right now for supervising people that are below a Class A misdemeanor. Just doesn't exist, and that's mostly because that's left up to the counties, and the counties have never done it. The state portion of it is in great shape. So those are the 2 pieces that we'll be working on. The supervision one will be the primary gap that we'll work on figuring out how to bring the county resources and the state resources together over the course of the next 9 months. So by the time we do a full rollout, January 1, we'll have that gap closed. But that's, quite frankly, they're just doing the right thing, wanting to make sure that people are getting supervised the way they're supposed to.
How do the current issues over how to move the prison or where to move the prison impact your legislation going forward?
Oh, it's been a wonderful impact. If we weren't having the conversation about moving the prison facilities, it would be dead. It would have been a no-starter. We would have never even brought the people to the table. But when you have a project as big as a prison relocation, it makes all the sense in the world then to talk about, if we're going to shake up the system, then now's the perfect time to shake it up. And it has gained momentum that like I said, 14 years that I've been working on. We've been trying to get 1 pod down in Gunnison, 1 pod for expansion in Gunnison. It's been 7 years we've been trying to get that, and finally got it last year for 1 pod. Fight for these tiny little changes, and then all of a sudden they announced the prison relocation, and boom, everybody's at the table.
Let me tell you why that's relevant. When you're looking at the costs, if you're going to move a prison and you're looking at some of the high costs, well, recidivism and what you're going to project long-term for in terms of beds and the size of the facility, it can be impacted by this reform in terms of, it doesn't have to be as large. It doesn't have to be, we're trying to change that trajectory, and we always have. But when you're looking to move the prison at the same time you're staring at that trajectory, there's a real dollar amount that changes in terms of the rebuild.
Yeah.
And so this has also drawn the interest of the Pew Foundation. They have come, and what's been really refreshing, and I've met with them, typically when they look at reform or looking at best practices or trying to drill into corrections and justice reform, sometimes there's a hesitancy by government to be defensive about what's being talked about or what you could do differently. They've told me that the reception by corrections has been with open arms, and the looking at their own processes and being willing to consider changes. It's been an incredible and strong working relationship. Well, all the conversations that have been happening in this space are what are drawing those parties and those stakeholders to this effort. And so I think the stars have aligned. I think it's an important process that works very well together, and I think it's going to net be a very good thing for the state.
What if the prison doesn't move?
It makes it harder. We've got some programming and going on in hallways. There needs to be new facilities built. One of the things, if you look at when you move the prison, is if you have independent consultants talk about, this is MGT America, looking at that 700 acres. If you have $1.8 billion of new economic growth and you have almost $100 million in local and state tax generation, well, those are new dollars that can be used to help justify and be the catalyst to go through the big rebuild and to go and make sure that those changes happen. That there is your bump. When you look at all the priorities the state faces every single year, you've got other competing issues of education and transportation. What is the catalyst? What is it that makes this get higher on the radar screen? And I think all the different factors that we've just mentioned come together and make this actually possible. So if you don't move the prison, you're losing some of those areas. And so you're talking about the rebuild just there. How do you necessarily pay for that? How do you make that happen? We're convinced that there's a way where the rising tide lifts all ships, and it's been part of that's why it's.
And I, to elaborate on that point, literally just walked out of the Prison Relocation Commission meeting that's going on over in the House building. And when you ask about the impact, they've now got a generalized footprint. It's not a finished design by any means, but you can already see in their own designs the fact that the reform and the prison are having a direct effect on each other, because now pods that they were anticipating having to build are now penciled in instead of hardlined in, which is fantastic. But at the same time, like I mentioned, we have been trying to fund one pod for 7 years. The idea, and we have facilities right now that you cannot run these programs in the facilities that we have. They're Alcatraz, they're Shawshank. They're never built for it. They won't work for it. We have to have new facilities or the reforms don't work. If you don't have the reforms, you've got to have a bigger prison. It doesn't matter if you move it or not. There will be a direct impact on the cost to the state for not getting that prison out of the way and getting new facilities.
Suzanne, one last question for Representative Hutchings, and then we need to steal him to get the afternoon started.
He's my pro temp. You know that poor guy's been up there.
Haven't seen
You might
his
set a
office
record.
yet.
You might set a record, Representative Hutchings, for on the dais. I'm sorry.
Anything else? If not, well.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you one thing before you head out.
Sure.
Medicaid expansion played a role in your proposal from the standpoint of mental health and substance abuse treatment. With the current developments that have happened this week, are you adjusting that element?
We have, and the speaker's been tremendously supportive of the reforms from the very beginning, which has been great. And so our budget, and again, I've got a reform hat on and I've got my budget chairman hat on. From the budget side, we put monies in to put that infrastructure in place, not facilities, just people and programs. We did also put in about $5 million in treatment. So without an expansion, we can have an impact. With some sort of expansion, we could have a much broader impact. It's estimated that 90% of the people in incarceration right now would qualify, and 80% of the people in incarceration have a drug abuse problem. So would it have an impact? You bet. Can we do it without? You bet. Are we going to do it regardless? You bet. Is the momentum that we're getting from the prison relocation carrying this thing? We have a tsunami of momentum right now, and we're going to ride that through and keep those two melded together and get it done. We'll just be able to do it in a much grander style if some version of expansion happens. And it could be, for this particular issue, it could be pretty much any version of that. Thanks, you guys. What an honor to be in the same room with the three.
Yeah, right. You're envying us right now, huh?
Thanks, man.
So we done? Is that it?
In all seriousness, we've got about 5 more minutes.
Speaker, getting to the Healthy Utah bill,
Yes, sir.
in regards to that, I mean, there's a lot of pressure out there, there's a lot of talk. Where do you stand today, right now?
Well, we have had great minds working on Medicaid expansion as an area of public policy. And we have always, and we started this back in December, we have been meeting at length, probably cumulatively, I think Representative told me probably 10 hours of time where we have come together looking at and staring at different plans. And we have, our position has never changed. We are looking to do better than we're doing right now. Does that mean Healthy Utah as it's been drafted in the bill from the Senate? We've talked and we've taken votes, and that bill doesn't have support. The support isn't close. If the purpose of committee hearings and deliberation on the floor is to pass bills into law, then we need to start talking about areas of agreement and areas that where we think you could find the math and the numbers you need to pass something this year. As long as we talk about a bill that truly doesn't have the support, then it might make a good public case. But it takes the time away from people that are fighting for committee time right now. Time is running out, floor time to get bills through. And I think we can do better than that. I think we can take our time and we can put something out there in a committee hearing and on the floor that has consensus and that would do better than we are doing. But look, if we're just going to be that bill or nothing, I'm going to tell you, we've got to do better than that. So that bill doesn't rise to a level where it's going to take time away from other bills and other sponsors' time that would want to see something pass. But this man has never stopped working on this front. He has plans, and he has always been working on this. And our caucus, we have 63 members. When I got here in 2003, after winning in 2002, there were 54. Now you can depend that those 9 new seats were Democrat-held seats. So the perspective of the House caucus, Republican caucus, has gotten much broader. Ask yourself this: how do you get such a broad caucus with so many districts that are represented and have such an exhaustive process in terms of 4 physicians that are House members who have different opinions about whether it's Healthy Utah or a moderated plan or a wait-and-see approach, and having every one of them advocate in the positions they believe in, healthcare administrators, insurance executives making these cases. How do you have that thorough of a deliberation starting in December and last week wholly dedicated to both of our caucuses, 2-hour caucuses, and not think that broad caucus and its opinion or its way forward isn't substantive? I will tell you this: you could not get 63 members of this House, and this leadership could not tell 63 members this is what you're going to do. That's not the role. We are too big of a caucus. I think anyone that would tell you in a political process where you have a large caucus that you are leaders of, that good information is ultimately going to drive good decisions. That's what we have engaged in. When we get to a point where we know, and by the way, we do this with a lot of bills. I don't want to call out any specific representative or bill, but if a bill does not have traction, they have to work and get that traction and get that support to see that bill move forward in the process. We need to do that on this topic of Medicaid expansion and agree where we can get to. Until we stop taking some of the issues that aren't going to pass and taking them off the table and work on something we can, it's hard to get there. But again, you can ask Representative Dunnigan. I want you all to pay attention to him, not me, since I get enough. Ask him, quiz him, talk about the things that we have that we've been working on. There needs to be an agreement, though, from the Senate and the governor to work on some common ground.
You know, you use the terms that you voted, you deliberated. Those you didn't vote publicly. You didn't deliberate publicly.
The only caucus.
Talk to the people who are saying this is not that's not democracy. That's
So the only caucus we closed was the last one. So any of the other caucuses, if you were there Tuesday, you heard the full debate that was going on in our caucus. We closed the last one. There's a narrative out there that if people just could vote their conscience or just vote in a secret vote, boy, we'd have all the votes we need. Well, there is no secret votes up here in the Capitol, nor should there be. But a closed caucus is about the most frank and honest vote or expression you can make, where you can ask questions, you can share concerns, not in a fish tank, but have that. I've heard that if lawmakers could vote a secret ballot, this would pass. In a closed caucus where the most frank conversations can be shared without the media and without those looking on, there is absolutely a lack of support to move forward. So my message is this. We can allow, if we'd like to, a bill to go through the committee process that doesn't have support and take that bill won't just be one of many on that docket that day. It will be the only one discussed. So you will have that committee and its only topic be that bill. And that bill can fail. And then what? We can get, with days waning and time getting shorter, we can get together and get to something that's good. But if we want to do this because we think that we're married to process on this one issue, because bills go through this kind of vetting, Max, all the time. If we want to go through that, I think we lose valuable time. The other issue is we have people mailing into districts. What would be the worst case scenario for me is if you saw some of the mail that's hit Representative Dunnigan, you go ask Senator Shiwazawa about Representative Jim Dunnigan and if he's trying to hurt Utah families, okay? I got a mailer, I don't know if it's here, but during this session, they have mailed into his district accusing him of trying to hurt Utah families. And I'm gonna tell you, false narratives and an attempt to get a lawmaker to vote in a certain way by building up a false narrative with constituents could work. What if it did? What if you have a generational decision right now and the way it got its votes was the money spent and the mail to intimidate or bully a lawmaker into a vote that they otherwise wouldn't make? If we want to have that, if we want to have a public hearing and we know we don't have the votes, my fear is that some feel they can push someone to that vote. And this isn't a theory. If I can hold the mailer and I can show it to you, for the only guy in the House right now that's on the record with an opinion, and we've seen that mail hit, I don't want to see my members go through that for something that isn't viable. But I'm telling you, if people want to come together and they want to consider the common ground that exists, and there is common ground, the door has never shut on that process.
But it appears as though you're doing everything behind closed doors, and that's what everybody's so upset about here, is that it's almost kind of the good old boy system behind closed doors, and this is our decision.
Dan, the only caucus we closed was the last one. The rest of the discussions, we had a conservative caucus that was held. These conservative caucuses are on Wednesday morning. Now it's just at 7 a.m., so nobody woke up and came, but that is not a closed caucus. But what it was we had Republican and Democrat House members. We even had state senators that attended. We had Dr. Patton from the health department there. Lieutenant Governor has come. We have had public and open discussion about Healthy Utah, about Medicaid expansion. This has happened. You've had in the Senate 2 hearings, and you've had that vote there. The only closed vote we've had deciding on where this caucus would go was that Thursday vote. Now, here's the thing. You've not heard me speak in strident tones, or you've not heard me speak in such a definite way as you do now. I'm telling you, I'm the Speaker of the House, and when we hear our caucus speak, when we see what's happened here, it's important to me that people have an ability to vote their conscience. And it's important to me that if we are interested in a process, we've got to take the things that aren't viable and we need to get to the things that are. And if the message is this bill does not have the support, but we have an architect and a person that is, he's chaired that task force for 2 years. There were recommendations from that task force that mirror the very conversations we're having, and every one of those task force discussions were open and public hearings. If the perception is we have never discussed this in front of the public or the press, that would be wrong. There has been extensive conversation. In fact, I got to tell you, we've got other critical issues. I've had the first conversation about transportation for the first time just yesterday with senators and Senate leadership. We are behind on some critical issues on transportation, public education. We have got to get to those issues. And if we want to keep talking about a bill that won't pass or doesn't have the votes to pass, instead of common ground or something else, we don't. In a 45-day session and with less than 2 weeks of work and of time left, we've got to get real. We've got to get to some important things and start finding common ground. We don't have time for bills that aren't viable.
Okay,
You talked
one more
about the
question.
attacks. Senator Shizawa was talking about a meeting you had with him last night.
Mm-hmm.
He said you brought up the attacks also and said that was a reason that you have taken the stance you did. Are you trying to shield members from attacks and from a tough vote? Or?
Well, like I said, when they if these were substantive discussions or a mailer attempting to, give me that. Okay, if this was the family we were talking about, which we're not, if the numbers on here were remotely accurate, if Representative Jim Dunnigan really did want to hurt Utah families, and this was somehow a constructive dialogue that was going on, then Lee, let's have that dialogue. But these aren't accurate. And this isn't the way to come to a vote in a process that we have here. And this doesn't happen on every bill. Have you noticed? Have you ever seen mail that comes in to try and intimidate someone out of a vote or into a new position? How often do you see that? We're talking about a generational decision. You're talking about a lot of dollars. And you're talking about people that want to influence votes in a way we don't usually encounter. I'm going to tell you, if we want to have a hearing and we want to have a debate about how we expand Medicaid and provide more health care coverage, we got to get real and talk about things that we can find common ground on. And this isn't the way to do it.
But you're a fan of American history. That's politics from John Adams and Thomas Jefferson on. In fact, that's pretty mild compared to what our entire history of democracy has been with public discourse.
Now,
So why shield?
Max, I'll tell you this, and this veers into a different discussion. But look, that mailer, who paid for it? Alliance for a Better Utah. What is it? Who funds the Alliance for a Better Utah? Do you know? Do they disclose? If you go look at my campaign account, you'll find every single disclosure that's ever been made and every expenditure that my campaign manager has ever written. I'm not even on the checkbook of my campaign account, but it's all openly disclosed and you can find it online right now. The House Investigative Committee has shown how dark money has manipulated the process, even the election process. Well, we've gone upstream from an election process, and now we're talking about how you vote on a bill, okay? I'm not interested in that. You know what I did? We went out and I paid from a speaker's PAC dollars to correct the record for Representative Jim Dunnigan, to correct the record on what we are doing here, what we're trying to do that's constructive. So to your point, Max, I get politics and I understand it, and I think freedom of speech is great. But I'm going to tell you that one of the frustrating parts I have is you get mail, Alliance for a Better Utah. I like a Better Utah. It must be a great group. We don't know a thing about them. We don't know who funds ads that would look to create that narrative. That frustrates me. I ran a bill on that where I
Does
tried
it
to get
show
more.
a disrespect for the voters to say that they can't get that? They don't see an ad like that and think, wait a minute, no one wants to hurt families. What is this group talking about? Why not just respect that the voters can get that's what's happening?
Well, I'll tell you this. I think that it's hard for us to be able to respond back. I think the way we've tried to respond back in Jim's district is unique. It's not been done before. We can try. I mean, you've got to have a point and a counterpoint for voters to even weigh what they're hearing. But I'll tell you this: at the end of the day, we've got to get to, and again, the politics aside, the mailers aside, okay? I think that voters, if we want to drive policy, even I'll tell you, this even frustrates me, Max. I want to know the poll question where a pollster calls a voter, a Utahn, and in one poll question describes the complexity and the challenges of Medicaid expansion to say, do you like it or not? Because I've seen polls used as a bellwether whether to do this or not. If there is a sentence out there that can cover what we've been covering collectively probably for 10 hours of what this decision means, show me that question. I want to know what the question is that gets the answer that would ultimately override what we do here and come to that decision. The public's process is this. They represent us. We run for election every other year. Okay, the House, we're the voice of the people. We're the arena out there. We know what it is to run in our districts. We know every voting precinct in our district. We're just 36,000 constituents. It's small enough, it's grassroots enough that we have our town hall meetings. We know our constituents. Every person that I've had that's been frustrated, and I don't know if you've seen around, but I am a little unpopular right now. Every conversation I've had with a delegate or a constituent, a voter, you name it, and we've walked through this process that we've gone through, there is an incredible understanding of what we're doing, a greater appreciation, I should say, for what we're doing. And the problem I have is that I can't communicate that through bullet points or a poll question. It takes a lot longer. Even in here, we don't have enough time. But I'm going to tell you, there is a process in front of us. We are working very hard. I think there's an opportunity to do something good. But look, perfect cannot be the enemy of good. If doing nothing is not an option, I call on our Senate and our governor to spend more time with Representative Dunnigan and look at this plan that actually addresses the coverage gap. Okay? The big rub on his plan is that he's only looking at 0 to 100% of the federal poverty level. You know the irony of that? That's the part that's not covered. ACA already covers people from 100% to 138%. 100% of that amount. Healthy Utah would have the state of Utah pay that portion from 100 to 138%. 10% of it, we would administer it instead of the federal government. We would run it. We would pay 10% of that amount. Now, I want you to think about this, and we're getting really wonkish, and you're never going to be able to quote any of this, I know. But I was told yesterday that our existing Medicaid projection numbers, these are consensus numbers with the governor's office and the legislative fiscal analysts, have gone up $22 million. $11 million one time and $11 million ongoing. So we're starting to try and build a budget here, and the House has put numbers and programs together that we've tried to fund. In our next meeting, we're going to start taking programs off, and appropriations that have gone through sub-appropriation committee meetings and have been prioritized, we're going to have to take those off to pay that new amount of money that we just found out yesterday that we didn't know we had to pay of $22 million. Okay? Do I care if that's a 10% match or a 30% match? Do I care how much is coming back to the state of Utah if I have to find $22 million more now than what I did yesterday? See, the state of Utah only pays out. So what we stare at is, what is the obligation of the state of Utah to keep its promises and make sure it can deliver on what it's saying it's going to do? The Healthy Utah plan has what I call the King's X clause. If it doesn't work out, doesn't happen, we can always pull it back. We'll make you sign a waiver that says, we know we don't get this forever if it doesn't work out. Every proposal that we have that Representative Dunnigan has worked on never does that. It never says, sorry, we can't do it anymore. We are measured. It is admittedly smaller. It helps the most needy. It hits the people that Representative Hutchings has talked about, but it is slow as you go. And it's designed in a way that we don't have a 2-year escape clause. We are ready to build and build carefully. That's responsible. And if we can get an audience on an idea like that, let's do it. But I'm not going to spend all that finite time on something that doesn't truly have the votes of our caucus. And I didn't tell them this is where we're at. This is what they've told me. There is support for that idea. There is support for the concepts I've described to you that Representative Jim Dunnigan has not just worked on now, but he's been the chair of that committee within those public hearings for 2 years, and is ready to present to if they'd like to do it.
All right.
So
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for your time, guys.
thank you.